Now it's a question of how to get there, and I think that's the issue that that we're wrestling with today, which is a good place to be, is the how, not the why or the what, but the how. So let me share with you why I believe connecting the islands via undersea cable is really critical to achieve our energy independence in the short term. And really when you think about it, all we're talking about here is connecting two different parts of the state. The fact that there's water between the islands adds to the technological challenge, and it certainly adds to the economic cost. But it's really no different than other connections, be it from Waianae to Kailua or Kona to Hilo. You have some more technological apparatus on the wire, but essentially we're connecting two disparate parts of our islands. And in doing so, enabling greater use of renewable energy, levelizing the price of electricity, and really having a more efficient grid and greater security statewide. So the technological issues have been largely resolved. There are a couple of dozen cables similar to this. Here's a cable from Australia that carries a similar amount of power, actually I think a bit more. There are cables throughout the United States, throughout different countries that go much further. In fact, a proposal from Iceland to Europe to carry geothermal resources, hundreds of miles. So the technological issues have been largely resolved. The environmental issues have also largely been resolved. We've had a cable between the islands for over a century, carrying communications information. Other high voltage lines globally have been studied fairly well. The marine impacts are nominal. And trust me, if there were significant marine impacts, I wouldn't be here arguing the case for cables between the islands. So what are the real reasons here? It kind of boils down to economics, and what's the fastest way to get to our clean energy future in Hawaii? I think you could make a really sound case for each island going it alone. Doing so, though, is incredibly expensive, and it's probably going to require some technology that's not quite ready for prime time. We hope to get there, though. But in the short term, we're facing a clear and present danger with the escalating price of electricity, with our tenuous reliance on imported oil, and of course with what's happening with the climate, with the insults we're providing by burning every last molecule of fossil fuel on Earth. So because of this, we need to look at resources that are at hand today that we can afford and put to use powering our state. So really three areas. One is an inter-island cable will maximize the amount of renewable energy we can use in Hawaii. Right now we have a kind of a disparate spread of population, economic base, and resources. That's just the nature of our islands. We have vast amounts of wind energy, solar energy, potentially geothermal on Maui. We know we have a lot of geothermal energy that could possibly be harnessed off of on the Big Island. But the thing is, they sometimes occur in places where the population, the economic center, isn't. So we need to connect these. Right now, we have surplus wind at night on Maui. In fact, the new wind farm being built by Sempra on Maui, is going to be curtailed or basically shut off up to 40% of the time. So 40% of the time, we're just going to be wasting wind energy on Maui because we don't have the ability to integrate it into the grid and put it to use. And that's just the nature of our archaic system that we have built. So imagine putting that to use, charging our electric vehicles on Oahu, or buffering the grid on the Big Island while they have some geothermal. So we will enable a lot more renewable energy to be put to use throughout the state if we connect the islands and build that base. It's one of the challenges that we have in Hawaii. It's pretty unique to islands. We have small island grids. This isn't the mainland where California, an electron might go to Kansas or to Canada, or the East Asia where these nations share electricity, or certainly Europe. We have small island grids, and it makes addition of variable energy resources very challenging. The issue comes up frequently. Well, using an inter-island grid inter-island cables are very expensive. We just need to do everything we can on each island. We need to do solar on every rooftop. We need to do aggressive efficiency. We couldn't agree more. Every single rooftop on this island needs to have a solar hot water heater. And that's why we supported a bill to mandate that all new homes have solar hot water and continue to support the tax credit. We need to put every resource on this island to work where it's appropriate. That's why we supported the 100 megawatts of wind on the North Shore here. And we need to be as aggressive as possible with our efficiency measures, reducing Oahu's demand, reducing all of our islands' demand. It's not a question of either or, though. If we're really looking at getting rid of oil in our economy, we have a long way to go. We use about 10 terawatt hours. 10 terawatt hours. Can you imagine how many zeros this is for electricity used annually in the state? We have a long way to go. So it's not a question of either or. We need to do everything, all of the above, all of the solar, all of the efficiency, everything that's commercially available. But in order to do it today and in the short term being the next decade, 2 decades, we're going to need to connect the islands to really put it to use and make it work. Second issue is the economics. And it's not just about the economics of the price of electricity, it's the economics of the equitability of people paying for electricity. Right now we know we're paying upwards of 45 cents in Lanai, or we're paying 32 cents on Oahu. A cable is expensive, there's no doubt about that. I'm sure we'll hear more about the prices. It's about $1 billion. And when you think about $1 billion, that's a lot. I mean, that would build rail from Ewa to Waipahu, right? So we got to put this in context, though. Clearly not. Rail folks are next door. Put it in context, though. And the context is we spend about $5 billion a year just bringing in fossil fuel. So over the period between now and when the cable's in place, maybe 7 or 8 years, we'll be spending about $35 to $40 billion on importing fossil fuel if nothing changes. So $1 billion in context, you really need to think of it that way. And over the life of a 25-year cable, maybe $125 billion for imported fossil fuel. But we look at it from a ratepayer perspective. Estimates put it about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, the cost of the cable that folks will see. 8 cents. What's 8 cents? Well, if you balance that 8 cents against a renewable energy source, which might be solar at maybe 11 cents or 12 cents, wind at 12 cents, geothermal at 8 cents, it becomes in this range of affordability that we're familiar with. But more importantly, what it does is it stabilizes that price of electricity into the future. If we connect the islands, we'll also be able to levelize the price of electricity across the islands. One state, one rate. We'll all be paying the same electricity rate because we'll be sharing these resources. What am I doing in time? 2 minutes, a 2-minute warning. So finishing up the economic case, it's not only levelizing the price of energy, it's also making clean energy accessible to all. And I think this is one of the central issues. You know, today, if you have the money, you can buy a photovoltaic system, you can buy an electric car. I think probably some folks have this. You can go further and actually buy battery storage. This is something that our founder, Hank Rogers, has done. Spent $500,000 to buy a huge system with battery storage. He's off the grid. So that's great. That's great for the 1%. For the rest of us, we need to make clean energy accessible to all. And this is what a cable will do. It's really central to kind of the democratic principles of making clean energy accessible to all, not just to those who can afford photovoltaic today. So finally, let me wrap up with kind of a third point. I think this is lost, but it's very important. Inter-island cable will allow more efficient use of our existing system with an eye towards retiring fossil generation units. Right now, we need to have this spinning reserve to back up our variable energy resources. This is one of the challenges we have without having storage on the grid today or smart demand response. We have to keep stuff running in the background to fill in. If we're able to connect our grids, we won't need as much of the spinning reserve on each island. We'll be able to share and buffer better that way. It's like adding supports to a home. We'll be able to share the resources better, operate the grid more efficiently, and hopefully start to retire fossil fuel generation units. And that's really what we're gunning for. So let me wrap up just by saying, the first cable in Hawaii was put in place over a century ago. It was actually 1890, the first connection between Molokai and Oahu, of all places. At the time we didn't, I can finish the sentence. We didn't envision a future where it would be unnecessary. We'd have iPhones and things like that. But it made the most sense at the time. And that's how we need to be thinking about this cable. This is affordable, it's within range, it's going to be able to put our clean energy resources to best work for Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And now you'll hear a presentation from the opposition. Henry?
Thank you, Marcus. I don't like the word anti or negative or opposition because what we're proposing is a different path forward. And I think Jeff hit a couple points very well that reinforce our position. So thank you, Jeff. You know,
It's in lieu of a donation.
you know, about 15 years ago, we were so proud because Life of the Land had a computer that had 4 megabytes of memory. 4 megabytes. And then we came up with the gigabyte computers, and now we have several terabyte hard drives. So we have millions of times more storage and capacity now than we had 15 years ago. You can watch a movie that's just 10 years old, and you watch somebody with a giant shoebox talking on the phone, and now we have these little wireless things where you can watch movies. In the first 6 months that YouTube was up, they had put more on the air than ABC, NBC, and CBS had combined in half a century. We're now at a point where if you want to look at any newspaper from 1860 to 1920, you can go to Chronicling America, and it's all digitalized. We're talking about digitalizing the entire Library of Congress. We're in a vast transformation. And as Jeff pointed out, the century before last, we put a cable in between Molokai and Oahu, not realizing that the future was wireless. Mina Morita, the current chair of the PUC, spoke at a Life of the Land conference in the year 2000. She said, quote, "We saw the transformation in telecommunications and what happened with wireless communication. That same technology boom that happened in telecommunications and in personal computers is going to happen in the energy industry." That was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and it really details the way we're moving forward. 2 years ago, the IEEE had a photovoltaic conference at the Hawaiian Civic Center, and Chris Mays, who was chair of the Arizona Corporation Commission, the equivalent of our PUC, spoke about cascading natural deregulation. Basically, the trend line on solar panels is this way. The trend line in electric rates is that way. It doesn't take a genius to realize that if you have a crashing line and a rising line, at some point they're going to cross. And she said she didn't know whether it was 5 years or 10 years or 15 years away, but Hawaii has the highest electric rates and the greatest variety of renewables in the United States. So that cross point occurs in Hawaii first. At that cross point, you will be able to debate as a resident, do you want cheaper on-site energy that is fully under your control, or do you want to pay a surplus and be attached to the grid that might go down? And what she said was, first, you'll get some people who will say, I'm going to leave the grid. For example, Jeff Sposs, who has separated himself from the grid. And then you have the total amount of money, the fixed costs, spread among a smaller base. So the utility has to raise the rates. Well, if they raise the rates, it becomes more economical for more to leave. Then you have a fixed cost among an even smaller base, and they have to raise the rates, and more people leave. And one of the things the proponents of the cable will tell you is, we'll levelize the rates across the state. But they're not levelizing them at what we have today, or what Lanai has now. They're levelizing them at some high rate that will end volatility and encourage even more people to leave. So I don't know if at that point you want to be the one who's still on the grid, paying the fixed cost that everybody is dealing with. So Hawaiian Electric files a 10-K, an annual report with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission every year. They're required to. This February, they filed one. And I want to read you a quote from Heco's annual filing to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Quote, "Increasing competition and technological advances could cause HEI's businesses to lose customers or render their operations obsolete." New technology developments, such as commercial development of energy storage, as Jeff's boss, energy storage, may render the operations of HEI's electric utility subsidiaries less competitive or outdated. Can you imagine that? Heco is telling the US government that they may become obsolete. And now there's a proposal to build a $1 billion cable. Well, actually, there is no major load center in Hawaii that has a single line connecting. Heco requires 3 lines because if one is down for maintenance and a second one crashes, they need a third one. And they priced a single cable at $1 billion. So you can guess what 3 cables will cost. Now, Jeff is right that there's no technological barriers to building a cable between islands. I would say that NOAA, the federal agency that is in charge of protecting marine life, which has expressed concern about the ecological damage this cable could bring as it goes through the whale sanctuary, Penguin Bank, and the South Molokai Reef. Their concern is enough for me, that there are ecological ramifications from the cable. We envision Heco moving to become an energy service provider instead of an electric generator and transmission line provider. So they have a future. We are moving towards a wireless future. Wireless in electricity and wireless in telecommunications. Yes, we need as much energy efficiency as possible. Yes, we need as much renewable energy as possible. No, we don't need it all. I don't know of anybody who goes into a car dealer and the dealer says you need 1 car for rain and 1 for off-track and 1 for your when company comes into town and I'll sell you 20 cars and that way you have 1 for each of your future needs. No, you buy 1 system. 20 would be enormously expensive. So we need to find ways of providing an alternative, on-site generation. I want to read you 1 quote. It's from Alfred Korzybski, a semantic and a scientist, US. He said, quote, "There are 2 ways to slide easily through life, to believe everything or to doubt everything. Both ways save us from thinking." So, Life of the Land wanted to really see an alternative put on the table, a distributed system where we have a lot of on-site renewable systems and storage, as Jeff's boss has done. We want to see whether it's possible for everyone to move in that direction. But we did not see anybody else stepping forward to do it. So we're writing a report. It's right now being reviewed by energy experts throughout Hawaii and throughout the nation. We're laying out a plan on how it can be done and how it can be done cheaper than the cable. And yes, the cable might cost $1 billion or $3 billion and it might be small compared to $130 billion, but it's more expensive than the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we will have a 5-minute rebuttal by Jeff.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Henry. And just to start, again, I appreciate that we're all on the same page in that we have a common enemy, and that's eliminating fossil fuel from Hawaii. And so it's a good place to start from. We're still talking about the how. And I've always appreciated Henry's passion and enthusiasm, and we need as many minds thinking about this challenge as possible in Hawaii. But we've been here before. In fact, we were here in 1977 when Senator Lim put together a great report looking at how to get Hawaii to energy independence by the year 2010. And it laid out the different scenarios of how to get there. Since then, we're using about twice as much oil as we were in 1977. So we have a tendency to have these great proposals and then hit snooze. We know what happened in the 80s. The price of oil plummeted, and we kind of forgot about it. So here we are back again, 2008, plan, the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, and a renewed push for 70% clean energy. And we're at a place now where we can really lose that momentum. And we can lose that momentum by having visions of things that may or may not happen in the future. And trust me, I am as much of a futurist, love looking at technology. That's why I got into engineering in the first place, of what could be. But don't let what could be stop us from doing what is and what's possible in front of us today. I hope that we have flux capacitors and dilithium crystals that run on ocean energy. I really hope that's in my lifetime. I also hope that we can perfect OTEC and have that as a baseload resource running our islands. I also hope that we have hydrogen-powered jets, because you know what? We're going to have a real hard time when the price of oil gets to $300–400 a barrel to fly in tourists and goods to these islands. We really need these breakthroughs. But what's in front of us today is an incredible opportunity to use the abundant natural resources that we have in an affordable way. And that's what's being discussed today in 2012. We can do this. 24 such cables exist around the world in places that probably pay less than we pay, probably have less renewable energy resources than we have. So we do need it all. We need to do it all. We need to do it all to end the importation of expensive fossil fuel. Just a few of the things that Henry touched on. One, I couldn't agree more. Technology is changing incredibly rapidly, and we hope to be the beneficiary of this more and more. But you know what? That YouTube that took off, if you're on Maui, you're still using a cable for the most part to look at YouTube. The Hawaiian homesteads went through a huge investment to get fiber to their land so they could take part more in this communications revolution. So this century-old technology is sometimes back to the future. We're using the same sort of thing. So in 100 years, are we going to be using an undersea cable? We might not. We might be transmitting something else. We have no idea. But today it makes sense, it's affordable, and it'll enable us to use all of our clean energy resources to their maximum ability. Curtailing 40% of the wind on Maui is just, it's a shame, Here we have these wind turbines spinning and no place to put the juice. And then over here we're importing oil so we can run our cars and keep our air conditioners on. It makes so much more sense to hooey up, to get the islands together and put all of this renewable energy to use. And again, the smart folks have done the work. Booz Allen Hamilton, Department of Energy, Natural Energy Laboratory, and they've Natural Renewable Energy Laboratory. They've looked at the numbers, and it pencils out. It makes sense. So now it's time for us just to make that decision. Are we going to do what we did in 1977 and say, we'll get there, technology's just around the corner, it's just around the corner, or are we going to make the tough decision? And I fear if we don't, we're going to end up with this suboptimal or awful future where we're embracing things like maybe coal or natural gas or just tying ourselves, deepening our relationship with an imported commodity that none of us control. So this is a real opportunity for Hawaii to come together, hooey up as a state, and really look at this as a state challenge that we need to come together on. We do see Hawaiian Electric's utility model, their business model changing radically. I agree, they're going to be more like a service provider, similar to your internet service provider. They don't create the content, they distribute the content as efficiently as possible. And part of that efficient distribution is going to be an undersea cable so they can move electrons from Oahu to Maui. What happens if Maui gets whacked by a hurricane? Wouldn't it be great if Oahu could come to its rescue and give them more security in that way? One other challenge that we have to think about is renters and apartment dwellers and folks who might not be able to access this off-the-grid future that some folks, again, like my boss, are enjoying today. This is really, the early adopter curve, and you're seeing the folks that can afford it do it. But so many people in Hawaii are renters, and they face a real different challenge there. And so what this cable enables is everyone the ability to access stable, affordable, clean energy. And those are democratic principles that we need to think about. It's not just for the richy rich, and hopefully the last person on the grid will be able to pay $2 a kilowatt hour until they can afford the system. But a cable will enable this. We can hooey up as an island state and put all of our natural resources to work. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, and now a counterpoint from
Our report will be an island-by-island solution because different islands have different resources, they have different values, and they have different community views. The talk is putting the cable in by 2020. We propose that that's really too long. We propose that as an example of moving forward, we should have Molokai leave the grid by 2015. That Molokai should become gridless, 100% distributed generation in a few years. And we propose a variety of ways of moving that forward. And you'll have to read my report when it's out. But in essence, the approach being taken by the big corporations, I fully understand. There is 1 trillion barrels of oil in the ground. 1 trillion that is recoverable. Jeff talked about, well, oil is trading about $90 a barrel today. Jeff talked about $300 a barrel oil. Now, the difference between 90 and 300 is 210. Somebody just has to wait for the oil in the ground, and it will increase $210 trillion in value. Wow, if you had $210 trillion, do you think you could purchase a few scientists who say that your method is the right way of moving forward? That we need massive technology, we need to link up everything, we need to make one sophisticated, huge computer network. So in case a hurricane comes and whacks Kauai again, the entire islands will be interlinked and everything will go off at once. That is not my view of the future. My view of the future is when a hurricane whacks out the grid, everybody still has power because they all have it individually. When a hurricane hit Florida, there were pictures of individual homes lit. When storms hit out in the Waianae coast, everybody went to one person's house who had solar, they had a nice cold fridge, they had a nice cold freezer, everything was working. The issue isn't, well, we have to build a system and harden it so much that it'll survive a hurricane, but instead we can each become resilient and the utility can help everybody move into the 21st century. Because remember, the electric grid, as we're currently talking about, is a 19th century concept. Edison would still recognize the grid that's being proposed for the future. The maker, Bell, would not recognize the telephone. We need to transform electricity. We need to move into this century. And if you were to take power from another island, at least make this room a little bit warmer than it is now. And open the windows. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now the moment we've all been waiting for. We have 15 minutes, at which time we will go between Jeff and Henry. Audience questions. You're limited to 1 minute of asking the question and a short 2-minute response. So stand up and identify yourself, where you're from.
Mary Marvin Porter from Big Island, outside of Hilo. I have heard the undersea cable would cost more than $1 billion, but let's say it does cost $1 billion. You said it would take about 3 to go from the Big Island to Oahu. And then if we add Maui and Molokai and Lanai, so that's up to about $6 billion. And instead, if we figure there are 500,000 houses in Hawaii, and for $12,000 each, we could put solar on them, and that comes to $7.5 billion, which by the time we do geothermal development and other things in order to have this, we'd be better off with solar on putting on all the homes.
Is there a question, Mary?
What should you say to that?
Jeff?
I appreciate you doing the math and thinking these solutions. Now, the challenge to this is, we fully agree, every house should have rooftop solar. But with that comes other expenses. Our grid can't handle it right now. We need to upgrade the grid, have a smart grid, and this is going to cost an awful lot of money so we can incorporate everyone's solar onto the grid. Also remember with solar, you're getting about a 15 to 20% capacity factor. So whatever your total amount is, we calculate maximum of 3 terawatt hours of electricity from all the solar in the state. You still have a huge gap to fill, about 7 terawatt hours. Add electric vehicles and you have even more of a challenge. So again, I think the option is all of the above. We need to do the solar on every single rooftop. We also need to do the inter-island connection. About the price of the different islands, there are some economies of scale to be had. We don't think it's going to get into the billions and billions. There's going to be value add for every interconnection in terms of grid stability and more renewables on the grid.
Except for the interconnection to your boss's house.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Do we have a question for Henry? Yes, please.
Hi,
Identify
Henry.
yourself.
Mun Chang. I'm just a small business owner, but I'm also I have a master's degree in electrical engineering, and I used to work for Navy Science and Technology Organization. So I do know a lot about electronics, and I really like your enthusiasm, and I want to learn more about why you oppose it so much. But knowing what I know in electrical engineering, there's no way I would want anywhere near wireless 1.6 gigawatt hour power source anywhere, all these wireless systems. And I'm also an RF engineer, so I don't know. And I worked on directed energy project for the Navy. What you were describing is a directed energy. I don't think I'd want that. And there would be a bigger environmental hazard than anything this inter-island cable would ever do. So I just would like to learn more about that.
There's a question in there, I think.
Yeah, you were talking about the military, and I'll digress for just a moment because the military has found that there's a lot of oil contamination on the surface of the aquifer. And serving 9 years as the community co-chair of Heco Restoration Advisory Board, I advocated separating the lead from the oil and using the oil for on-site generation instead of shipping it to the mainland for disposal. So we actually advocated use of Hawaii's petroleum for energy. So we're not entirely for getting rid of fossil fuels. We should use up what we have that's contaminating our aquifer. We're not in favor of direct energy. We're in favor of reducing the amount of energy on the grid. If you talk about putting solar water heaters on everybody's house, that decreases demand. On Oahu, peak demand on Oahu occurred several years ago. Each year we use less and less energy on Oahu on the grid. That trend line will continue down because as you put on more energy efficiency and more renewables on site, less electrons are moving through the grid. There has been some talkulation on TED, those kind of shows, about sending electricity through the air, direct current, without using lines. We're not talking about that. We're talking about removing the need to be attached to the grid.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Yeah, you right back there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm an economist also. And I have a couple of questions more than comments. I live in Hana, Maui. We get our cable beamed down from Haleakala to Hana. You guys have Roadrunner. They can't give us Roadrunner. We get a thing called the Wave, which is a cut-down version. I have a lot of friends living in Cape Hulu. They're totally off the grid. For you, the question is there a power loss when you use cable and an efficiency loss, and how much is that? For you, the problem is you need to basically need storage capacity. And how are you going to have distributed storage capacity?
Okay, great. Jeff?
There is some associated loss with this is a DC direct current cable. There would be more loss with an AC cable, and that's the choice to go to DC, even though you add the complications of having converter stations. But the loss itself is less than 5% over the length of the cable. So there is a nominal amount of loss just with any transmission.
Hana actually has geothermal potential, and geothermal can be 24/7. So Hana could separate itself from the Maui grid, control its own future, and geothermal is much cheaper than any other technology being proposed.
But we produce more than we can consume. We ought to ship some of that over to Oahu or Wailuku or someplace.
You could, but there are highly efficient small geothermal generators, so you would not need to. But if you felt like becoming an energy exporter to the rest of Maui, you'd be free to. It's up to the community to decide how you want to go. But you have the ideal storage system through on-site geothermal and HANA potential.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentlemen up here, then we'll go back to the tap.
My name is William Fay. I'm from Oahu, and I'm a retiree of Hawaiian Electric. Information. I guess my question really is to you. It's more of a comment, unfortunately. The bulk of the consumption in Hawaii is in Oahu, and the bulk of the consumption in Oahu is in urban areas. For my condominium, I tried to figure out what the photovoltaic area required for what our current consumption would be. And it turns out I would need 4 times the square footage of the area that I consume. So that's, from what I know in technology, that's never going to be a possibility. I'm always going to have to get power from someone else. I cannot be self-sufficient. So the question gets to be is, aren't your estimates of self-sufficiency in an urban area totally overestimated?
That's a very good question. First of all, there is solar glaze being developed that can go on the side of buildings. Second, a lot of the high-rises, if you simply open the window and had a reverse air conditioner, you could tap off the trade wind. The trade wind could cool your building, and you can generate electricity from the wind coming in. There are a lot of possibilities. Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a major consultant in town, contradicted Hawaiian Electric by saying that Oahu has more renewable energy potential than any of the other islands. They said you could have 990 megawatts of rooftop solar on this island. Now, that's not my number, it's their number.
Thank you.
As a community advocate, one of the things I'm wondering is why a discussion about each island being energy independent has never happened. I've talked to people across all the islands, and I'm a justice advocate. I've talked to many people who have nothing to do with the environment or energy, and they all ask, why are they pushing this one thing without talking to us? So, for whoever can answer that, why aren't we having a full-on discussion of alternatives instead of pushing one alternative?
I would say there are 2 reasons for that. First, imperialism and colonialism has always been about taking what somebody else has and saying it benefits everyone. Second, there has been a great reluctance by many people in authority to picture any alternative. Next door, we're having a discussion on rail. I remember when the Department of Transportation Services came out to our community 20 years ago and said, we're open, we want to hear alternatives, what do you want at your rail station? The proposal for the cable is that we need clean energy now, but that neither the state nor anybody else in the state has ever even defined clean energy. It has no definition in state law or Heco or the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. No definition, but we need it. That is because they know where we're going, they want to achieve it, and they have blinders on, and anybody who disagrees with them is wrong. We personally believe the best solution is bringing everybody to the table, letting everybody put their plans on the table. Having more plans, more ideas, and more solutions always arrives at better conclusions. Insisting that the first thing you come up with is the only way to go and you're incapable of changing is a very dangerous and very costly approach.
Okay.
So Jeff.
Yeah, you know, we've been discussing this. We've been discussing this for the last generation or two. There's been a lot of discussion about how to achieve energy independence and what that looks like. And if we're really concerned that there's somehow not a definition, if it walks like a duck, if it, what did the Supreme Court Justice said? I'll know it when I see it. Here's what clean energy is, and here's how Blue Planet defines it. is it indigenous, clean, and sustainable? So does it not come from 3,000 miles away and contaminate the climate for the next few millennia? We know and we see. We know what clean energy looks like in Hawaii. It's solar, it's wind. In some places it may be geothermal, hopefully some biomass, maybe ocean energy, maybe something else. But we can put this stuff to use today. And we should endeavor to have the islands as energy independent as they possibly can be. The way the islands are distributed and set up, we can only by working together will we achieve energy independence. Hopefully someday we'll be there, but right now we're stronger together. And we need to work as quickly as possible to kick oil out of the state. We don't have the luxury of time to wait for something around the corner. We can do it today affordably.
Thank you. We'll go back to the audience. Audience, any questions? Please, your name, please. Yeah, yes, sir.
Dan Dyer, on your cable, is there any other uses that cable could be used for? So if the electric went obsolete, could the cable be used for something else?
That's a great point. And I think folks that are looking at the cable are also looking at doing broadband, fiber, other communications. So yeah, it could potentially be used for other resources.
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
Just quickly, so how many cables are in terms of connecting up to the islands? How many cables are they figuring on putting in?
Well, it depends on the routing, because they do, as Henry has aptly pointed out, you need redundancy. So the contingency is what they call it on this island is basically 200 megawatts. So they're ready if the 180 megawatt coal plant on this island shuts down, they'll have backup. So what that looks like when you connect the islands is about a 200 megawatt failure you can still withstand. So it'd be likely to have 2 cables if you're just connecting a couple of the islands, maybe 3 if there are multiple islands involved. So
cables per island, you mean, to Oahu?
yes, coming into Oahu, 2 islands. So you need that redundancy, but that's baked into the cost. The cost of $800 million to $1 billion for the system.
But you're talking about connecting up how many islands to Oahu?
Well, that depends, and that depends on a lot of factors. Right now, or there's going to be an RFP that goes out looking at developers to provide power. But just going forward, I think it's a blank slate right now. What's the most optimal connections? Do we use Maui as a hub? Can we possibly make it to the Big Islands and use geothermal? So this discussion is more just the benefit of connecting any 2 islands.
Okay. We have about a couple more minutes. You, sir? Yeah.
I'm sorry, just random, but do both technologies require like a smart grid or smart meters to be going in?
Repeat the question.
He asked if we need smart meters or a smart grid to have inter-island cable. And we actually don't, even though that's a place where we need to be in the future. There have been a number of studies looking at the interconnection to bring in large amounts of wind, for example, to this island. And basically up to about 25% of our load on this island can be satisfied by neighbor island wind without making those hardware and intelligence upgrades to the grid that we later want. But we can actually do it without doing that now.
Heco opened up a docket called Advanced Meter Infrastructure. It was the first smart grid regulatory process before the Public Utilities Commission. We filed a motion to intervene. We were accepted. We got in. We said, hey, the technology is rapidly changing. You need to wait and see how smart grids evolve. Hawaiian Electric said, there are so many definitions, we can't even define a smart grid. After Heco asked the PUC for between 8 and 10 time delays, the PUC shut down the docket and said, don't come back here until you're ready. The smart grid is an extremely costly thing because what it will say is, in one database, all the information about the grid will be stored. Anybody who can penetrate that can knock out the grid or steal customer data. And right now, at the national level, experts are analyzing how to build a cyber-secure smart grid. That is a very costly endeavor, and that's what's holding up the smart grid. We think that's the wrong way to go, but I know that's another area of disagreement for a future panel discussion.
Thank you. Okay, 2 more questions, and then we need to wrap it up. Okay, the woman back there, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Weatherford. Elizabeth Weatherford. I live on Puna District, Hawaii Island, and I'm sorry to say it's comments that I'm going to make, not questions.
Oh, can I have a question, please? You can phrase it as a question.
All right, all right. How can someone say without disingenuity that it's since we're running out of oil, we have to do geothermal? It's being on our island. It's being proposed as a only one or the other. And since the greatest amount of fossil fuel oil that is being used for power in the islands is actually reprocessed fuel. It's a reprocessed product that comes from fuel that is primarily used for transportation, jet transportation. That is the main thing that this energy is being imported for. It is not the power generation. It is the byproduct stuff.
Jeff?
You know, yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, every molecule that we burn, though, is costing us something, and it's also costing our environment. I mean, we can't just think we can burn this so-called waste product and get away with it. We need to solve each of our sectors independently, or together where we can. But yes, jet fuel is the big challenge, and we're not talking about that so much today, but that's a huge, huge challenge that we need to get our arms around.
But isn't it a diversion to act as though we're going to solve the one problem when it's isn't it a diversion to act as though you're going to solve the problem with power generation when in fact that is enabled by the transportation fuel?
Again, we need to solve all of these problems, and electricity is one of them, and transportation is another problem, and we need to solve them independently. So we don't have a situation, which I think you're alluding to, where we have a bunch of waste oil left over. We really need to ratchet back our use on the transportation side, on the jet side, and then also on the electricity side. That doesn't, suppose that we have to do geothermal, though. Again, all these decisions are ultimately going to be left up to the community where the projects exist, and we think they're going to be the final, decision maker in that. But look, we're all in this together. We need to share our resources.
Thank you very much. Okay,
let me give you two quick. First, you're talking about the raw barrel of petroleum, and it can be cracked into different proportions. And it's usually talked about jet, ground transportation, and electricity. On the mainland, the dominant one is ground transportation. In Hawaii, the main one is aviation. Second, and this deals with the community issue, Red Road in Puna was an area where people came in and they said, we want to live off the grid. Then a single person came in and said, well, I'm going to grab a property and demand to be attached to the grid. And there was a court suit. And basically, Heco said, we are going to put in a transmission line into your neighborhood whether you like it or not. And the community lost. So I hope this time around, the community actually has a chance to stop something they don't want.
Okay, thank you.
People, please read Harry Kim's testimony to the Office of Environmental Control. Quality control. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last two questions. You sir? Right there. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Bill Gallardi. I'm an attorney. There's one question I want to ask both of you. And this is really the nitty-gritty of what we're really talking about. I understand both positions, and they're absolutely right on. The one thing you guys are not talking about is we do have a monopolistic system of our energy. So does everybody else. It's not just us. How do you propose to take your position and take that to our legislature and take care of that problem so that we smooth ourselves into the positions that you're taking? That's a very big problem.
It is a problem, and in fact, it was a solution over a century ago when we decided to establish an electric monopoly because of the small market, regulated by the Public Utilities Commission so they'd keep the prices in check. That has evolved over the last century, and I think you can make a good case of whether or not a monopoly exists, whether or not we can have wholesale electricity and retail buyers and set up that market. But the way it is today is we have the monopoly. So how do we best empower people to take control of the energy future? And we think folks who want to go off the grid ought to go off the grid. If you get solar hot water, get photovoltaic, do everything you can. But you know, building a cable actually may help democratize our power by enabling more diverse energy sources. And if you notice, those diverse energy sources are owned by competitive other operators. It's First Wind, it's Revolution, Sun Power, it's Puna Geothermal. It's not the monopoly. This is a competitive market that these folks are playing in, and it's cutthroat competitive, and that benefits ratepayers at the end. So this really would help evolve them, I think, somewhat into a new service model where they would be providers of electricity instead of generators of electricity. But this is obviously a much longer conversation for what the institution looks like.
Thank you.
The quick answer is, yes, they are a monopoly. However, other electric monopolies can exist also. Carlito Caliboso, former chair of the PUC, made that point a few years ago. You can set up a rival monopoly if you wish. Second, yes, we do have monopoly power. And that's why we propose taking a small island like Molokai and showing there's an alternative to encourage the utility to make the necessary steps towards the new future. We hope that they're a part of it. We hope they don't get wiped out in the process. My father worked for IBM. IBM denied personal computers for anything more than a fad. They lost half the world market, and they suddenly went, oh my God, PCs, they're real. So we hope that Hawaiian Electric gets that, oh my God, feeling, and say, yes, there is an alternative, and we're going to move towards it. The problem is that monopolies, especially ones that are over a century old, tend to move very, very slowly. And unless they're given a shock, they tend to just follow what they've always done. So we need to shock them, but keep them in the picture.
Okay, last question, please.
Okay, I'm Jeff Sakes, and I teach engineering electromagnetics at UH Maui College. I'd like to challenge 3 facts that were stated in this meeting, and I guess my question is to the panel, why didn't you challenge it? First of all, it was stated that a house can be energy sufficient with solar panels for $12,000. I think it's more like $50,000.
How much?
$50,000 to include storage for nighttime, for cloudy days, and so forth. Okay, it was also stated that that cable could be used for broadband. It's a DC cable, can't be used for broadband. It was also stated that there is danger in high-powered cables. And to my knowledge, there has been no laboratory animal injured by high-powered cables, ever.
Professor Sachs, appreciate the clarifications. I certainly agree with you. You're going to add a huge premium for storage for photovoltaic. This also supposes, I think the 12,000 supposes a tax credit, which obviously costs someone, right? Costs someone something. So I think 50,000 is probably more accurate. The point about this, though, Karen, I guess fiber would be bundled in with the whole mix, and you can actually see it here. This is the fiber piece right there. So
I agree with everything you said, with one small caveat. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, in charge of marine ecosystems, fish, and those kind of things, said that if you put a fiber optic cable in the, a electric current cable in the water, it will emit EMFs. And while EMFs are not harmful to people, there has been no proof that it's harmful for people. NOAA said it may affect navigation and it may affect communication between con-species, that is two of the same species, and it may affect the ability of endangered species to detect food and to detect predators. Those are not my words, but that's what NOAA said in comments to the draft programmatic EIS, that they expressed concern along that. You may be right that they're wrong, I don't know, but that's...
Is this cable coaxial or bipole, quadrupole, octopole?
Hasn't been decided.
Okay. All of those are specific designs to prevent EMFs.
All undersea electric cables, unlike telecommunication cables. Telecommunication, if there's any EMFs go in, all undersea cables, to my understanding, emit at least some level of EMFs. But again, that's NOAA, that's not me.
But there's attenuation in the water.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been really wonderful so far. Now we're going to wrap it up with allowing, we'll Jeff and Henry will have 3 minutes each to wrap up and summarize their positions. So we'll start off with
Well, you know, if we can only harness the enthusiasm and the passion, I think we could solve our clean energy issue immediately. But just in wrapping up, I do want to acknowledge Representative Kaufman, who's with us today, who has been a great advocate for the and if you have any wild and crazy ideas, I recommend talking with Representative Kaufman for next session. You know, as I've repeated many times, putting an inter-island cable between our islands will enable us to use all of our abundant natural resources to the fullest extent, and it'll do so in an affordable way. And this is technology we can use today. You know, if we're talking about the impacts, which may or may not exist, we don't think they exist for marine mammals and other species. What we do know is what every single National Academy has told us, that if we continue the present course of burning fossil fuel, we're going to have a planet that's very different on the one than the one that we grew up with. We know that as a fact. We can no longer say, well, let's wait for this next technology. Let's hope that this happens. We need to act today. We can't behave like it's 1977. It's 2012. We have opportunities now. They've been installed in dozens of locations in other parts of the world. We have the resources here that are being put in the ground as we speak on Maui, on this island, and elsewhere. We have the technology. We're going to be spending billions and billions of dollars on electricity in the next few years. Let's just reroute that to build the infrastructure so we can take full advantage of our natural resources here in Hawaii. There's an African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We have a long way to go to get off oil in Hawaii. We need to hui up and join hands. We know we're stronger when we're together. The islands will be more resilient when they're connected, sharing the resources, sharing the baseload power that they already have, and then, you know, having that efficiency of having a full system like that. It'll also make clean energy more accessible to those who don't have the luxury of going out and buying photovoltaic, an electric car, and storage like my costs. The other 99%, we need to think about them and how they're going to fit in this clean energy future. And this technology today is ripe. It's ready to go. We can afford it, and we can put it to use powering our islands into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Henry?
I'm always uncomfortable when somebody says, we don't have to define something because we all know what it means. Clean energy, solar, wind, that's all we have to know. Because the platform, the thing that you have to hold a 400-foot tower, a giant wind farm in the ground, is a massive piece of concrete. And concrete is a major CO2 emitter, making concrete. Also, magnets in wind use trace minerals. Right now, China is the world's leading producer of wind turbines. And they produce the magnets by pulling up huge amounts of material out of the earth, pouring acid over it, and leaving huge lakes of toxic acid on the ground. So to me, a wind farm isn't necessarily cleaner than a fossil fuel power plant. You have to look at the specifics of each. You have to define the terms, and you have to understand them. I think you need very rigorous analysis. And that is why I hope that the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement for the cable, will give a very rigorous analysis of all the reasonable alternatives that is required under federal law. If it isn't doing that, it's a violation of federal law. The Ninth Circuit, U.S. Court of Appeals, has said if you do not look at reasonable alternatives, the EIS is invalid. Jimmy Carter said, quote, "We must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles." Our principle is, let's look at the alternatives and let's not blindly assume that one thing is clean and one thing is dirty. Everything is gray. We need to move forward. We need to save the planet. We can do it together. And it does not mean that we make an automatic assumption that one path is the only solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see if anyone's minds has been changed again. If you support connecting the islands via an inter-island cable, please clap now. Okay, if you oppose an undersea cable, please clap now. It's about the same. Anyone left? Anyone who has not weighed in? Please clap. All right, there's a bunch of Democrats here. Okay, thank you very much. How about a great hand for Henry and Jeff? Good job, you guys.
That if you have a solar panel on your house, right now the utility can't measure its output.
Bill. How's he doing?
They don't have any, they can't even, but they right now cannot even read distribution lines on their own grid. Right now, they can read their transmission lines, but they cannot read their distribution lines.
Yeah, I
No, I
tried to
have a
be.
meter at my place where they read how much I get and how much I give them.
Right, but they can't, but that measures it over like a month.
Okay.
They want to be able to read it on a 10-second per 10-second period. They want to be able to instantaneously tell your increase and decrease in both your demand and your load at your house.
Yeah.
So they want to be able to read everything about you and your supply and demand. To do that means they have to put in sophisticated computers that can track all this information and can interpret it in real time to influence their generators. That's what's smart. It's making basically your house, instead of being dumb in that they get it once a month, they have real-time knowledge of what you're doing.
So you're saying a smart meter does not do that? Or you're saying it does?
It's one step in doing this thing. You need a smart grid, you need a smart line, you need a smart meter, you need a computer system, you need a data storage system, and you need programs to be able to interpret all that.
So are you saying we should go that way or not go that way?
I think that's a very costly way to go, and it's unproven whether it will do anything.
So instead we should do what?
We should have the grid that we have now and seek to gradually decrease the amount of energy we pull off it by relying more on on-site generation and efficiency.
So you're saying actually we should have batteries and not be connected to the grid?
I would like to see more batteries and less grid connection, yeah.
But in the meantime, those of us who are connected to the grid, they're not letting new houses on. Is that the appropriate thing without a $5,000 or $10,000 study?
The reason for that, and this hits, the Public Utilities Commission has created something called the Reliability Standards Working Group. It's looking at the 15% level to figure out whether that's acceptable or whether it should be raised. That is all being done behind closed doors, behind protective agreements, behind non-disclosure agreements. So I know about it because I'm on the panel, and I'm on the minimum load subgroup. But I can't discuss it with you because I've signed non-disclosure agreements.
So what should we do in terms of other people that want to get on the grid and have solar? They just
Right now, we're reaching the 15% limit in lots of areas around the state. So we need to, including Maui, including Molokai.
including the Big Island.
Yeah, including everywhere. Large sections, not Hana. Not Hana. Hana's at 1%, I think. But we're hitting that limit, and there's only 3 ways of changing it. 1, increasing it from 15 to 20 or 25. 2, getting a whole bunch of people to join your circuit so there's suddenly more demand. Or, in other words, if you could get somebody to move in next door and use up a lot of energy, but not have solar on their roof, then suddenly there'd be more demand on the line, and So we really need to, and the third way is to leave the grid, so then you can go to 100% and it doesn't matter.
That is very expensive.
But you have to have your storage.
And that is, and that there's an enormous amount of research being done on. I think we're a few years away, but storage is really being researched heavily.
Well, is Heco justified, or whichever you call it, in saying there's only a 15% solar that we're going to allow?
That standard was set up
first by California Public Utilities Commission 15 years ago, and it's a standard that's been adopted.
And is that true throughout the whole United States now?
Lots of places use it. There are a few distribution circuits in Hawaii that exceed 60% renewable.
60 or
60. 60. There's one distribution line that's at 100%.
Where's this?
They're on Lanai and the Big Island. But I can't really go into that because it's, again, it's technical and it would go behind closed doors. It's protected.
So what are we to do to try to get more solar if they're now asking, what, $5,000 studies for individual homes to come on with the solar?
One thing that's being discussed is whether several homeowners can do one study combined rather than all individual studies. But that's still, it's going to take a little bit of time for the PUC to unravel.
What if we tried to establish us like small hui's of homes where they have just their electric, somehow a smart grid or whatever it would be, a small...
You can establish hui's, which are fine. If you give me your card, we can carry this on, because you're asking some technical questions that...
Thanks, this is really good.